The butterfly effect is real, and these scenes could have changed the entire course of the MCU and beyond. Part of the difficulty of Bruce Banner and the Hulk's shared body is their inability to directly communicate with one another. The two personalities seemingly aren't able to easily interact, and this becomes a huge problem when Hulk refuses to manifest in the wake of his humiliating defeat against Thanos. This problem is eventually solved with the formation of Smart Hulk in Avengers Endgame, but the film almost gave a much more direct conclusion to Hulk's MCU storyline. In the planned scene that never made it to filming, Hulk was to enter the Soul World's waste station, much like Thanos did upon snapping. The scene would have shown Hulk and Banner separated, but in the same plane of existence at the same time, finally able to reconcile their differences once and for all. A comment from Avengers Endgame writer Christopher Marcus does seem to imply that the scene is maybe still canon to the MCU, but seeing it happen with everybody's own eyes would have been a great close to Hulk's, well, rushed arc. In a unique case for the typical editing choices of the MCU, the opening scene for the Avengers was almost told in a different way. Rather than opening with the activation of the Tesseract, the film almost began with an interrogation of Maria Hill, led by the World Security Council, set after the hectic events of the Battle of New York. Maria begins to explain the situation to the shadowy council, sending some little quips Nick Fury's way in a bold accusation of his incompetence. Look, she's not entirely wrong here, pointing out the ways in which the conflict could have been avoided had Nick Fury made better decisions. Unfortunately, this criticism of the shady Nick Fury as a leader never gets much room to shine in the entirety of the MCU. Not to mention the bold editing choice. If this scene had made it in, maybe the series would have been more willing to take bigger narrative risks in later entries. It's no secret, the Incredible Hulk is the black sheep of the MCU, coming just after 2008's Iron Man, but when the idea of shared universes was merely an idea. An alternate opening showed the grim reality of Edward Norton's Bruce Banner battling the alter ego of the Hulk. Taking place in a bleak backdrop of the Arctic, Banner tried to take his own life with a weapon, only to have Hulk spit out what came out of that weapon. The enraged green giant went on to smash a glacier to pieces, and if you look closely, you'll see the frozen body of Captain America and his shield being freed from their icy slumber. So this would have overhauled the origin story of Chris Evans' first Avenger, and how Nick Fury came to find him in the Fury's Big Week comic series. Still though, this blink and you'll miss it cameo was a great way to tie Norton's forgotten Hulk into the lore of the MCU. More than just having the honor of kickstarting the MCU, Iron Man planted the seeds for everything that would come after. The post-credits stinger of Nick Fury gave us a taste of the Avengers, but branching well beyond, it almost introduced a certain wall-crawling hero and some gifted youngsters. In an extended cut of Samuel L. Jackson's famed post-credit scene, Fury mentioned radioactive bug bites and assorted mutants. It's wild to think that the MCU's first outing could have introduced the concepts of Spider-Man and the X-Men, but those convoluted rights issues kinda nipped it in the bud. Instead, we had to wait until 2016's Captain America Civil War to see Peter Parker in action, while 2022's Ms. Marvel was the first teasing of the X-Men and mutant kind, and now? We'll have to see. As one of the few MCU deaths that stuck, the demise of Aaron Taylor Johnson's Pietro Maximoff, or Quicksilver in Avengers Age of Ultron, was a real tearjerker. While it was bad news for the star's short tenure in the MCU, turns out the Maximoff twins almost survived the movie's climax. In case Disney overturned Joss Whedon's decision to kill Quicksilver, there was an alternate ending where he survived, as well as seeing Pietro in a new uniform at the Avengers compound. But instead, a heartbroken Wanda Maximoff, complete with her OG accent, wept for her fallen sibling. Quicksilver's survival would have undoubtedly altered Wanda's tragic arc, and you don't see her being Multiverse of Madness's big bad if she had her twin brother by her side. Also, without Quicksilver's death, we'd never have gotten that Ralph Boner reveal from WandaVision. Then again, that might have been for the best. In the trailers of Avengers Age of Ultron, we saw brief glimpses of Ultron forging himself a smoldering new body, made of vibranium. However, such a scene was never actually in the film. When the character first appears, he's made up of discarded parts of the Iron Legion, and next time we see him, his full form is already established. However, it would have been interesting to see how the character came to forge his first body. Look, I think this character is one that most fans agree could have used a bit more depth and villainy, and seeing how the recently born Ultron creates a body for himself could have maybe been what was needed to make Ultron a fan favorite villain in the MCU. instead of an afterthought? Most extended versions of canon MCU scenes simply add a few extra lines of dialogue that weren't deemed worthy of a final cut. Even then, however, all it takes is a few well-placed words to constitute a meaningful character change in continuity, as is the case in an Iron Man 2 deleted scene where Tony Stark requests more info from his father's files on projects Pegasus, Goliath, and Exodus. Both Project Pegasus and Goliath show up later in the franchise, with the former being Marvel's covert study of the Tesseract, and the latter being Hank Pym and Bill Foster's attempts to make themselves really big. Tony having knowledge of either Infinity Stones or Pym particles that early in the story probably changes his approach to a lot of future situations, but it's Project Exodus that is the real game changer. So in the pages of the comics, Exodus was a secret SHIELD operation looking into the nature and origin of mutant powers. It marks the second time in as many Iron films that Marvel Studios attempted to, and then bailed on, to drop a mutant-related hint. Something that offers up some tantalizing possibilities about a wildly different, mutant-saturated Infinity Saga that never came to be. But once again, time will only tell if that ever gets referenced again, now that we have the X-Men rights in the MCU. The final pre-credit scene in Avengers Age of Ultron featured Captain America and Black Widow teasingly addressing the new Avengers roster. So Sam Wilson, Rhodes, Wanda Maximoff, and the Vision. But the team could have been all that and so much more. Not only do we have that alternate ending with Pietro surviving and joining everybody, but there was also a version of the scene where Carol Danvers appears out of nowhere, already in full Captain Marvel regalia with no prior introduction. According to Kevin Feige, it was a Joss Whedon idea that he said no to. So Captain Marvel was in a draft, but to Kevin, it would have done that character a disservice to meet her fully formed, in a costume and part of the Avengers, when already 99% of the audience would be like, who is that? He's like, it's just not the way we've done it. The way they revealed Scarlet Witch in costume at the end of the movie, those were Captain Marvel plate shots. Joss was like, yeah, we'll cast her later. And he's like, yeah, Joss, we'll cast her later. We're not putting her in there. Finally, Joss was like, okay, let's use those to let Scarlet Witch fly into frame, give her a big entrance. And that makes sense. She's come to their side, and she deserves the cool intro, which would feed into the other movie that would start filming in a couple of weeks. You know which one. Bringing Captain Marvel into the fold so early would have meant widespread alterations to the general story arc of the franchise. While Danvers' first solo outing could have still been a prequel, an Age of Ultron debut would have had her around for Civil War, Infinity War, and that likely changes the outcome of both. Whatever side she took in Civil War basically automatically wins, and she might even be enough to prevent Thanos from completing the final what could have been. And finally for today, following Peter Parker's MCU debut in Captain America Civil War, it was, Spider-Man Homecoming that let Tom Holland stretch his 8 legs. Alongside the introduction of characters like Aunt May, Mary Jane Watson, and Flash Thompson, there was also Donald Glover's Aaron Davis, who would become the Prowler. Well, who could become the Prowler. Those up on their comics will know Davis is the uncle of Miles Morales, which already had fans theorizing about this hero's debut. Miles is still MIA in the MCU, but back in Homecoming, a deleted scene all but confirmed he's out there somewhere. So after being glued to a car by Spider-Man, Aaron phoned Miles and was like, sorry, I'm not gonna make it. Following the success of Into the Spider-Verse, we're hoping for Miles to pop up soon. Alrighty folks, I've been Alexa, see ya!